Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, January 29th, 2020. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the best films of the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
So Ben and Chris are back. Chris, you survived not just one, but 2 plane flights.
Technically 3, because I had to stop in Atlanta on the way there. So it was 3 plane flights.
Yeah, people want to know, how were the plane flights?
They were fine. I think I'm pretty much as good as I'll ever be with flying right now, which is I'm beyond the point where I have a complete meltdown and I just feel nervous all the time instead. So I guess that's progress. I went from being like sobbing at the airport to just being like, oh, I feel awful, but I don't sob. So there you go, everyone.
Nice.
I know on the way back, you arrived at the airport early because you mistook your flight time for an earlier flight time. So, like, is it worse being in the airport and, like, the dread knowing that the flight's coming, or it doesn't?
It depends. So I usually like to get to the airport a little early because I head right to the airport bar and start a drinking. But the problem with this was we're in Utah, which is a very Mormon-y area, and they actually have the Philadelphia airport. You can get there at like 5 a.m. and they'll serve you whatever you want. But in Utah, they don't start serving alcohol until 8 a.m. And I actually got there at 7. So they were like, sorry, we can't serve you, because I went to a place that had a bar. And I was like, bummer. So this was actually the first time I didn't get liquored up before a flight. So that is also progress, I guess.
Wow. I know when I first started going to the Sundance Film Festival in 2004, the whole bar situation was a lot different. Like on Main Street, if you wanted to go and have a drink at the bar, you actually had to be a member of the bar. So you had to sign up for a membership fee, and you had to have someone that was a member basically recommend you. So they had this weird process of, like, you'd go down the stairs to this bar, and like there'd be a person that's a member that like basically works for the bar that would sign up for your membership. I don't know. It was like a whole weird thing to get around some kind of like weird Mormon laws, but I don't think that's happening anymore. So I don't know. Yeah. And also I remember back in the day at the grocery store, they had weird like versions of beers and stuff that had less alcohol content because there were some kind of like regulations because of Utah. So
wow.
Yeah. Anyways, people are not listening to this for alcohol. They're listening to this to find out the best films coming up this year. Sundance Film Festival is good at that. It's good at discovering like small up and comers that we weren't expecting to be big things coming up, not just this year, but sometimes like when something gets acquired at Sundance, it comes up the next year, just because of how long it takes to just distribute a film. So we're going to talk about your 8 favorite films that you saw at this year's Sundance Film Festival. And I guess Chris, we'll go from we'll build up to the one you like the most. So, Chris, at the bottom of your list of 4, what is the film?
It is Miss Americana, which is the Taylor Swift documentary. I went into this with no real expectations. It was like sort of the opening night film, and I knew it was going to be big enough that we should do a review for it. So I sort of was just like, sure, what the hell, I'll go see it. And it actually turned out to be pretty enjoyable. I don't dislike Taylor Swift's music. In fact, there are several songs of hers I really like, but I don't really know much about her beyond, tabloid headlines. So this film was kind of eye-opening for me, and it made me appreciate her as an artist. And she seems like a genuinely good person, and I was just really impressed with the documentary. It was funny, it was sweet, and a big part of it is really about her sort of literally growing up and realizing that she can use her voice for things beyond just entertainment. It's all about how during the primaries last year, she realized, she couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore and not get political. And so she finally decided to endorse, Democrat politicians because she was very much against Marsha Blackburn, who's from her home state of Tennessee, because
Yeah,
Marsha Blackburn is a monster.
And that's pretty big because, like you said, she comes from the South, and I'm sure she had a large following on the right. So
right, and there's like a whole scene where she sits down with her management team, and they're like begging her not to do this. They're like, look, if you do this, you're going to lose some of your audience. And she just insists that, she can't sit up back anymore. She has to, she has this powerful voice and she feels like she might as well use it. So it's a pretty, that's not to say that it's like an overly political film. Like the politics stuff doesn't really come in till the end, but I was just pretty impressed with it overall. It's well made. It's not like the best documentary ever. There's a lot of like filler scenes with her just sitting around, being goofy. But for what I was expecting, which was pretty much nothing, I was very impressed with this.
How honest of a film is it? Like, does it just make her look great, or is there like some stuff that you weren't expecting them to show, some sides of her?
I grappled with this a little bit. I said it in my review too, that like any film like this where you can tell she had, some sort of input into it, you have to question how honest it is and how much she allowed to be shown or not. I won't say it shows anything negative about her, but it does present her as very human and very, down to earth. And she talks about her eating disorder, which she really hasn't ever talked about before until this documentary. So while there's nothing in the movie that makes her look negative, there's a lot of stuff that just makes her look normal, which again could be all staged for all I know, but it seemed pretty genuine to me.
Ben, number 4 on your list is a movie called Bad Hair.
It is, yes. This is the second feature film from Justin Simien, who is the writer-director of Dear White People, and he made that movie back at Sundance in 2014 is where that film premiered, and then he's since gone on to sort of adapt his own movie into a Netflix series, which is mostly very, very good. And now he's back with like a totally different type of thing. This is a 1980s horror thriller about a killer weave. So this sort of like up-and-coming assistant at like an MTV style network in Los Angeles in 1989 is basically forced to get a weave at this place because she is ambitious and wants to move up in this company, and her sort of image obsessed boss is basically saying you have to change your hairstyle in order to climb the ladder at this company. And the weave is like cursed or something. There's like some sort of a mystical element going on here, and the weave actually has a taste for blood and a desire to kill people. So it's a really it's not a full-blown horror movie. It's more, I would say it's like more campy than full-on scary. But it's a movie that has a lot on its mind. It reminded me a little bit of Get Out, not only because it comes from, an up-and-coming black filmmaker, but also because both of those are movies that are about forces which are trying to appropriate black culture and like actually literally take over black bodies for nefarious purposes. And I think there's a lot of humor sort of woven throughout this, no pun intended there, but and like a ton of references to old school horror movies. There's like a lot of Stanley Kubrick in this movie. There's some major The Shining vibes happening here. Not to say that this movie is on that level, but just in terms of like, it's very clear that Justin Simien is very, very inspired by the cinematic landscape that has come before. And it's cool to see a totally brand new type of story told from a filmmaker with such a singular voice that also pays homage in clever ways to some of these like big recognizable horror movies that people will definitely know of. So I also want to give a very, very quick shout out to Elle Lorraine, who is the star of this thing, and she's like an unknown actress. I mean, I just think she might have been in a couple TV shows, but nothing huge. This is her first movie role, and she absolutely kills it. The cast in this thing is pretty impressive, but she is like the center of the movie. The whole thing is riding on her, and much in the same way that Justin Simien sort of launched Tessa Thompson to stardom back in 2014, I would not be surprised to see Elle Lorraine sort of get that same level of acclaim after her work here. So hopefully this will serve as sort of a launch pad for her. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with Bad Hair.
Do you know if this has distribution? Because I'm looking at the list of sales. I don't see this on there.
I have not heard that it's been picked up yet, so I would not be surprised to see, like an A24 type pick this up, because it definitely has that kind of vibe to it to me. But yeah, like I said, it's very much like a vision from a singular filmmaker. It's like only Justin Simien could have made this movie, and I really liked that aspect of it too. Very
cool, and very, very good for Justin, because I remember back in the day where we'd go to like these Paramount press screenings, and he'd be the guy like signing us in. Because he used to work as a publicist, and now his career is like taking off completely. Okay, Chris, what is your number 3 movie? Horse Girl?
Horse Girl. This is a Netflix movie starring Alison Brie. And this really caught me by surprise, because I wasn't really sure what to expect. The trailer was a bit odd, and I was sort of just like, I don't know what this is. So it starts off seeming like a really quirky rom-com where Alison Brie plays this very shy young woman who works at like a craft store, and she doesn't really have any friends. And one night, it's her birthday, so her roommate sort of like drags her into having fun and sort of sets her up on a date. And the date goes really well, and everything is nice and sweet. But then the movie starts turning like really, really dark, and we find out that her character's grandmother and her mother had mental health problems, and she starts to experience sort of these issues too, where she's having like really weird dreams, and she starts to get really paranoid, and she also starts to experience lost time, where she'll sort of black out and wake up somewhere, and she has no idea how she got there, and she starts to suspect a bunch of things. I kind of don't want to give it away, because the less you know, the more interesting the movie is. But it was very fascinating to me how this movie starts off very, very light and funny and almost goofy, and then it gets very disturbing and dark, and it sort of ends up in this middle ground where it has amusing things in it, but it's surprisingly unsettling. And I was not expecting it to turn out the way it did. And Alison Brie is great in this. I mean, I like her in general as an actress, but I think this might be like her best performance, because she has a lot to juggle here. She has to be both, funny and also playing a character who's sort of losing her mind. So this will be on Netflix very soon, I think in February. So it's worth checking out when it arrives there.
Yeah, and this comes from Jeff Biena. Is that how you pronounce it?
I believe so, yeah.
And he wrote I Heart Huckabees back in 2004, and he made his feature directorial debut with a movie called Joshy, which I think I saw at Sundance a few years ago. So, yeah, interesting.
Right. He also directed Life After Beth and The Little Hours, and I don't really like either of those films. So to me, this is like the best thing he's done.
Okay, very cool. Ben, what is the next film on your list?
It is called Come Away, and I think I talked about this one in our most anticipated discussion that we had a few days ago. But this is the movie from Brenda Chapman, who is primarily known as an animation director. This is her first live-action film. She was the director of movies like Prince of Egypt and Pixar's Oscar-winning film Brave. And Come Away is an origin story of Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, and those characters grew up as siblings in this story, and it's about what happens to them before they sort of go their separate ways and become the fairy tale characters that we know and love. So I really like this movie a lot. I think Brenda Chapman is an excellent filmmaker. I have been waiting to see if she would jump into live action for a long time. She's one of those filmmakers that really hasn't done very much, and every time she makes something, I'm always interested, but just sort of like, there's too long a gap between her on her filmography there. And I'm really glad that this movie is as good as it is, because hopefully it will serve, again, as sort of like a launch pad for her to be able to, roll that momentum and keep it going into future films. But for this one, I really, really liked it a lot. It's got a great cast. Angelina Jolie, David Oyelowo, those two play the parents of the 3 kids at the center of this story. Yeah, there are 3. I don't know what that means. Hint, hint, hint. Could something terrible happen to one of them? I don't know. All 3 of the kids are very good too. I think my favorite thing about this movie, though, is, you might have heard me talk about it's a prequel to fairy tale stories. A lot of times prequels are tricky, right? Like, you have to nod to expected tropes and imagery that you're familiar with. But if the movie just becomes a checklist of familiar things, the end result is awful. So Come Away does it basically takes a page out of Klaus's playbook, that Klaus, the animated movie on Netflix right now, that is the Santa Claus origin story. And the reason I say that is because both films really do feel like totally organic with all of those references. It's almost never, you almost never feel the filmmaker sort of turning to the camera and winking at you, like, and nudging you in the side, like, hey, get it? See what we're doing here? Like, get this reference? It's all, those references are there, but it's actually fun to see how they are incorporated into the story, because most of the time they're in sort of like slightly unconventional ways and just really fascinating ways. And most of the fun of this movie is just sort of seeing how all of the things that you know about these characters come to be through this completely separate original story that's being told here. So that's called Come Away. I don't know if this one has distribution yet either, but it's a really great family movie. It's I think top tier performances from everybody involved. So I would not be surprised if this becomes like a big family hit if it gets released later this year.
Yeah, it doesn't have distribution yet in America, but I'm guessing by the big names in this that it's going to get something somewhere. So, okay, yeah. Chris, what is number 2 on your list?
Number 2 is Shirley, which is a film I talked about in our most anticipated for Sundance. It's from Josephine Decker, who directed Madeline's Madeline, and it stars Elizabeth Moss as Shirley Jackson, who wrote The Haunting of Hill House and The Lottery and other disturbing stories and books. And this was great. It's not a biopic because it's a fictional story. It didn't actually happen, but it draws on, events from Shirley Jackson's real life. And the story is about this young couple who move into the house that Shirley Jackson lives in with her husband, played by Michael Stuhlbarg, who is a college professor. And they find out right away that the Shirley Jackson and her husband had this very unconventional relationship, and Shirley Jackson is not, for lack of a better word, a normal person, in that she's prone to sort of like fits of rage and bouts of depression, and she has times where she can't get out of bed, and she has other times where she just lashes out at people. And she's a very difficult person to live with, basically. And the young woman in the couple sort of is like terrified of her at first, but then they sort of start to form a bond. And in the meantime, Shirley Jackson is writing this novel inspired by a true story about a student from her husband's college that disappeared, and she's sort of like investigating this disappearance. And I feel like if a quote unquote normal director had made this, it would have been sort of like a stuffy biopic. But Josephine Decker does all this really interesting, weird stuff where the camera sort of never sits still, and there's all these very strange sound effects that shouldn't be there. Like there's sounds of like trains running by and insects and stuff that, even when they're like in houses, there's no reason to be hearing these sounds. And that also could have backfired, but it works very well because it sort of puts us into Shirley Jackson's fragmented headspace. And Elizabeth Moss is so good, which is like nothing new at this point. Everyone knows she's a great actress. And somehow she's found a way to always play difficult, troubled women and always give a different performance. Like, she's played several female characters who have sort of fractured mental states, and she never does it the same way, no matter how many times she plays that character. And she's so good here. And I don't know how this is going to play with like a wide audience because it's such a strange movie, but I loved it.
I've seen a lot of critics love this film, so I'm sure it's going to get acquired at some point, but it doesn't have a home quite yet. But let's go from Shirley to Sylvie. Ben, tell us about Sylvie's Love.
Yeah, Sylvie's Love is the sexiest movie I saw at Sundance. This is a period piece romance that takes place over several years in the late 50s and early 60s, and it stars Tessa Thompson and rising star Nnamdi Asomugha, I think is how you pronounce his name. He actually used to be an NFL football player. I had no idea about this. I'm writing my review of this movie as we speak, and I just looked into this guy and was like, wait, what? And he's also like produced some movies and stuff too. I've never seen this person on screen before, but he is so good in this movie, and their chemistry is so hot that I thought the screen would catch on fire. This movie is like, it's like a throwback to really old school, like golden age of Hollywood, just swooning, simmering romance movies. And it's about he plays a like a jazz saxophone player, and she plays like an aspiring television executive. And it's sort of like a star-crossed lover story where she's engaged to somebody else and they meet and fall in love, and several years go by before they see each other again, and then they reconnect later in life. And it's this whole like it's just such a the score it's like a sumptuous movie. That's a weird word to use, I think, but that's really what it feels like, this old school throwback that just like wraps you up in this blanket of warm cinematography and excellent music and the soulfulness of these performances. And man, it is just like an enchanting, lovely movie. So I don't know if this one has distribution yet either, but
it does not.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if you're a fan of movies like, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, for example, like you're going to love this movie if it comes out. Hopefully it's going to come out soon, because I think the performances are, yeah, like I said, just really great. And the whole vibe of this movie, I want to live in this world and listen to this incredible music and spend more time with these characters. It's really good.
While you've been talking about this movie, I've been staring at the only still from this movie that's been released, and it has a couple like on a street, and it really does give you like it's such a beautiful shot, and it does definitely give you like La La Land kind of vibes, or I'm excited to see this. And again, it doesn't have a distributor yet, but that doesn't mean it won't, because it has some big people in it, so I'm sure it's going to get out there. Chris, the number one film that you saw at the Sundance Film Festival.
Yes, and this is something that does have a distributor now. Well Go USA picked it up, and I honestly am shocked anyone picked this up, because I can't see this getting a conventional release, and that is Possessor, the new film from Brandon Cronenberg, who is the son of David Cronenberg. And I was excited to see this going into it, but holy shit, this blew me away. I have never really seen a film like this before, and it literally just stunned me watching it. The closest I can compare this to is sort of like a horror movie Inception, but even that really isn't right. Andrea Riseborough plays a contract killer, but she doesn't actually physically kill anyone herself. She works for this very elaborate company that has found a way to literally implant her consciousness into other people's bodies. So they put her mind into the body of someone else, and that someone carries out the murder and then kills themselves, and then that's how she gets out of that person's head. So it's like the perfect crime, because to everyone else it looks like the person she's possessing is the killer, when really she's been hired to do it. And it's about her, being hired to go into the mind of this guy played by Christopher Abbott and kill basically this guy's entire family to be. He's about to marry this woman who's the daughter of a very rich man, and it's all about that. And things don't go according to plan, and that's basically all I'll say about that. But the look and the feel of this film is so incredible. It's probably the most violent film I've ever seen in my life, and that's saying something. It's insanely violent, to the point where the audience I saw it with was sort of just like gasping every 10 seconds. And I know that gives a sense that, it's like a gratuitously violent thing. And I guess it is gratuitous, but that's sort of the point, because the movie is really all about how Andrea Riseborough's character is trying to divorce herself from humanity. Like early in the film, we see her reunite with her husband and her child that she's estranged with, and she has to sort of like rehearse being human before she goes to see them, because she doesn't really know how to display those emotions anymore, because she spent so much time brutally murdering people. And it's just such a brutal, unrelenting, dark movie. Like there's not an ounce of joy in this film. So if it's definitely not going to be for everyone, and I could see this turning off a lot of people. But I'm the type of person who's always looking for something new in movies. You know, I see so many movies that there's almost nothing new to me when it comes to a film. So when I sit down and I watch a movie that seems completely unique and completely unlike anything I've seen before, I'm kind of floored. And Ben can attest to this because I came back to the condo after it ended. It was late at night and I was just like raving about this film. I couldn't like shut up about it. And like beforehand, when I went to see, it was like a late showing and I was exhausted and I was like, all right, I'm going to watch this. I'm going right back to the condo and right to bed. And instead I came back so hyped up. I like couldn't sit still. I was like losing my mind talking about it.
And this premiered at the Cannes Film Festival and was sold to ArcLight Films there, which has distributed some films like First Reformed, I think. Maybe. So yeah, we should be seeing that somewhere. If not
That's
on
interesting.
the
If Wellgo USA has it now, I wonder if ArcLight just bought it for like international territories or something.
Oh, is that Wellgo? Okay, sorry. Maybe.
Yeah. I think ArcLight is the international distributor for this because A24 distributed First Reformed in the USA.
Yeah. While I was saying that, I was like, that's not correct. But yeah, it's so confusing, the world of international releases. But I'm sure we'll get this at least on streaming. If not
I can't imagine this getting like a standard theatrical release. I don't even know. Like, if you're going to rate this film, it's going to end up with like NC-17. It's that violent. I can't imagine this getting like an R.
Wow.
Okay, so the film that, like, from my brief look at the Sundance lineup, the one that I think I was most excited about is because it just seems the most accessible, and that is Palm Springs. That this sold for a record amount. It beat the record by 69 cents. It sold for, what is it, $17.5 million and 69 cents to beat out The Birth of a Nation, which came out of 2016. But by the way, this year at Sundance, there's been some big deals. Like, there was a documentary that was sold for $12 million. Wow. Of course, it was sold for $12 million to Apple, who has, FU money to throw around. But and it was a film called Boys State. Neither of you saw that, Boys State?
Mm-mm.
No. So that sold for $12 million to Apple and A24. So that'll be coming at least to Apple TV, if not to theaters. But Ben, your favorite movie of this year's Sundance Film Festival, Palm Springs.
Yeah, I'm kind of shocked about this. Reading the description of the movie, I thought that this movie could go either way. I was definitely excited about it because it's a romantic comedy that stars Andy Samberg, who is from The Lonely Island and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, stuff like that, and Kristen Milioti, who is, I know her from How I Met Your Mother. She was also in The Wolf of Wall Street. She's been in a bunch of stuff. You definitely recognize her. And it was basically like the program guide sort of danced around what this movie is actually about, but since the movie debuted and sort of got this rapturous praise and everything, I feel like I can give away the premise of the movie here, especially since it got picked up by Neon and Hulu, and when they market this thing, they're going to have to address the basic premise of the movie. So yeah, I guess if you don't want to know anything at all about Palm Springs, skip ahead for a few minutes, but it's basically like a Groundhog Day style romantic comedy. So, Peter, you were talking about it being one of your most anticipated movies just based on the premise and the cast and location alone. But now that it's a time loop movie, I had heard fan of those.
Yeah, I had heard that. That was one of the reasons I was excited about this.
Okay, yeah, I had no idea. So when I walked in, I was like, oh wow, they're doing this. But that's the thing about this movie is it's not like it builds up to that. Like pretty, within the first like 10 or 15 minutes that's what's happening, and that's why I think this movie is really interesting because it takes a lot of the the sort of like well-worn elements of that genre and it tweaks them a little bit. Like by most of these movies, it's like you have to get through the whole movie before you see characters who have like completely mastered their surroundings, like Bill Murray at the end of Groundhog Day when he's doing all that ridiculous stuff with like the chainsaw ice carving and all of that, or like Tom Cruise, like at the end of Edge of Tomorrow where he knows every single step to take on the battlefield and all of that. This movie sort of opens with that, where Andy Samberg's character has been hooked into this time loop for a long, long time, and he has already mastered his entire environment, and he is just under the impression that nothing matters because he can't escape every day it ends, but he wakes up the same as before. So he's tried everything he can think of to sort of escape this thing, but just has settled into this life where he just messes with people and kind of like does whatever he wants and just lays around and drinks all day. And then Kristen Miliotti's character gets sucked into the time loop with him, and then things get really, really interesting from there. So that's the basic premise, but those two actors are so good in this movie. It's also a film that is, I mean, it's like a laugh out loud comedy. It's funnier than most of the studio comedies that I've seen over the past at least 2 or 3 years. I would not be surprised if this ends up being the funniest movie of 2020. But it's also like a comedy that actually has something to say. It tackles these really like profound ideas about long-term relationships and how a really, really terrible looking situation on the surface could be viewed slightly differently with a shifted perspective. And there's a great performance by J.K. Simmons in this, and a supporting character that I don't want to give away. So this movie has a lot going on, but it's the funniest thing I saw. It's the most mainstream thing I saw there. So it kind of makes me feel like a little bit of a basic bitch to be like, yeah, I loved this movie because it's clearly like the most commercial thing that I've ever seen at any Sundance. But man, it's so good. It's so solid. The script is great. The performances are awesome. I just want to like watch this movie over and over again.
Yeah, and Neon acquired this, and Neon has released some very edgy stuff. This probably might be the most accessible thing that they've acquired, right? I
think so. And like The Lonely Island, you know, they produced this movie, so they didn't direct it. The comedy trio of Akiva Schaffer, Jorma Taccone, and Andy Samberg, they didn't direct this movie. Most of the movies that they make end up like tanking at the box office and eventually become cult hits. But this one definitely is going to be a mainstream hit when it comes out, because the premise and just the combination of all the elements that I mentioned a second ago, like that this is going to be a big deal, I think.
I will say this. There's oftentimes like that big buzz out of Sundance, and it makes a big deal. Like there was this movie probably like 10 years ago now called Hamlet 2, which I think sold for $10 million. It was like it was the biggest deal at the time at Sundance, and no one's seen it. So you never know. You never know. But it does sound like it has all the ingredients to hit the mainstream public. I was wondering, did you guys hear about any other buzzed about films at the Sundance Film Festival? Because Sundance is notorious of, you know, you're going in between screenings, you're on these shuttle buses, you overhear people talking, and then you end up having to change your entire schedule of plans because you hear about this great film you never heard of. Was there any buzz going around Park City for films that you just didn't get to that you want to put on people's radars?
Chris, you had like that one situation where you had the option to go to one movie and you chose the other one, and then it sounds like you made the wrong choice, right?
Yes, there's a movie called Minari, which stars Steven Yeun, and it's an A24 film, and it's about a Korean family living in America. And I had heard really good stuff about this, and my last full day there, the press screening for this was the same time as a press screening for another film called The Amulet, which is a horror film. And, you know, I'm a horror guy, so I was like, all right, I'm going to see Amulet because I'm the horror guy. It'll probably be good. And The Amulet was the worst film I saw at Sundance. It made me want to die. It was so bad. And everyone says Minari is great, so I'm really kicking myself for not seeing that because according to everyone I talked to, it's phenomenal. And I really wish I had seen that, because if I had, this was a weird year in that nothing other than Possessor and I guess Shirley, nothing this year seemed quote unquote great to me, but everything I saw was for the most part enjoyable or watchable. And Amulet was the only thing I saw that I outright hated. So if I had just seen Minari, I would have had a good year, but I didn't. So there we are.
Is there any other breakout films that you guys just didn't get a chance to see?
I'm trying to think.
It's weird.
That kind of year.
This felt like a very muted year. I mean, you know, for all but this is my second year, but last year felt bigger than this year. And this year felt kind of muted. And I don't know, that might just be, I just didn't see the right things or what, but that was my experience. Ben?
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. And also like in terms of the movies that I did see, I think I came away seeing 13 movies and a VR experience that I'll talk about here in a second. But of those, I think only two of them I really didn't like, and the rest of them I either thought were good or very good. So yeah, I mean it was a more quiet year, but I think it was just like solid, you know, like most of the stuff I saw was like, yeah, this is a pretty good movie. So I guess that's like a higher than normal batting average for Sundance, because a lot of times you get more of a dramatic mix where it's like the highs are way higher, but the lows are really, really low. And luckily I didn't have that kind of mix this year.
I remember there was this one year that like Whiplash was like the opening film. And we saw that, and it was like starting the festival off with like the biggest explosion, and then the rest not being quite as good. But yeah. Okay. Anything different or notable of like about the Sundance Film Festival this year in general?
I think they changed the way that the bus system works this year or something. I'm not sure exactly how, but the buses were definitely running way slower than normal. So that was unfortunate because, you know, you're relying on that transportation to get you all the way across this tiny town, which like you can walk a lot of places, but it takes, you know, 30 or 45 minutes sometimes to walk from one theater to another that you really need to go to. And when you're running things on a tight schedule, sometimes that just won't work. So you're really hoping that the bus system works out really well. And it was kind of hit or miss this year. But yeah, in terms of like programming and stuff, I'm not sure. Chris, how many movies did you end up seeing? Have you counted yet?
I haven't. I think it's it's either 13 or 14. I'll have to count.
Yeah, so like that's pretty good for two people,
Yeah.
and I feel like I don't think we had a single crossover movie on our whole I guess joint schedules. So I feel like we got a good almost 30 movies or something. That's like a decent cross section of the programming that this year had to offer. And I think, you know, if both of us came away like relatively pleased with it, that probably speaks pretty highly to the quality of the programming overall this year.
For sure. And you mentioned you went to this VR thing. Is this the thing downtown where they have like a whole bevy of like VR demos?
No, so this year they did a lot of that stuff right there in Park City. I think they call it the New Frontier section.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I mean, for years and years, Sundance has been, you know, experimenting with virtual reality and like all sorts of like alternate forms of storytelling involving technology and stuff like that. And I just never really have time to get to any of that. But I had a big gap in my schedule this year. And there was this VR experience called Spaced Out that I had heard about and was kind of fascinated by. And the thing is, it's like an underwater VR experience. And I'd never even heard of this before, but apparently it comes from a company called Ballast VR, which some of you listening to this may have like done some of their stuff before. I'd literally never heard of this company, but they've developed like the first waterproof VR headset, and they have sites set up around the country where you can put on these VR headsets and like go down water slides, and it looks like you're, you know, sliding through dinosaur times
what?
and stuff like that. Yeah, I know. I'd never heard of them before. And I've done several like big VR things here in Los Angeles, but maybe because we don't have like water parks and pools and stuff like that.
We do have water parks. We have a water park in San Dimas and in Orange County, but like I've heard of like on roller coasters doing VR, which sounds like I would be sick. But water, like what happens like once you hit the water? Like it feels like I would be like you would not know. I guess your body knows which way is up. Anyways.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But anyway, so you can look into them if you want to. I'm going to try to write an article about this and dive in and you know, do some more research on the companies behind this thing. But Spaced Out is really, really fascinating because it's like they took actual archived recordings of the Apollo 11 mission to the moon, and they play that underwater in this pool. And it was you had to go to Sundance headquarters because that was the only pool in the area, and you could line up and like, you know, select a time to do this experience. You change into a bathing suit. They wrap a like flotation device around your stomach, and you just like lay there face down on the water, and you put the VR headset down under the water, and it has a snorkel coming out of it so you can breathe, and your ears are underwater, so you're hearing, you know, in this really cool echoey underwater kind of way, these archived recordings of the mission to the moon, while you're seeing these really psychedelic images of like planets, and there's a reference to Georges Méliès's trip to the moon with the rocket ship in the moon's eyeball. You're all probably familiar with that image. That was in there, but you're just like sitting there floating, and you're tied to a like a safety hook kind of thing, where you're not just gonna like float off and hit the wall or anything. So you can really just like peacefully sit there and not move, and just get completely immersed in this really weird VR experience where you're hearing these, NASA scientists and technicians and stuff talking. And it really, I think it sort of gets to the experience of like what the astronauts must have felt like going to completely uncharted territory. But visually, it's not just, our boring ass gray cratered moon. You're seeing like all these crazy colors and like giant mushrooms that are the size of trees, and like all sorts of Alice in Wonderland-y type of imagery. And the camera is like, slowly pushing forward, so you feel like you're sinking into the into the image, even though you're not going anywhere. And it ends with this like big hallway kind of thing, and it reminded me so much of the ending of Interstellar, where Matthew McConaughey is just like zooming through this 4-dimensional space or whatever, and it's very much like that. And with the combination of the colors and the planets and all this stuff, it really taps into this sort of primal plane of existence, where I think, if aside from doing drugs, this is probably the closest that anybody will ever get to physically experiencing what it might be like to experience the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like, that's the level of artistry that's on display here, in terms of like what it does to your brain chemistry while you're underwater doing this really weird VR thing. And I talked to the artist who is responsible for this, and he was saying that their hope right now is to scale it out and have this available to a lot of the to a lot of the places where Ballast VR, this virtual reality company, currently has its setups and infrastructure already in place. And he was saying, like, really all you need, it's so much cheaper than something like The Void or some of these other big VR companies, because you don't have to rent out or build a huge warehouse and all the infrastructure that goes along with that. Pools, public pools, water parks, whatever, all that stuff is already there. So they, in terms of like being able to get it out to an audience, they just have to like strike deals with the people who own that stuff or those locations, and they're good to go. It's all like, the technology is right there with you. So this could be something that you actually have a chance to maybe experience one day, and it's called Spaced Out. And I would definitely recommend, if you see anything remotely like this, definitely check it out. And again, I'm going to try to write it up on slashfilm.com sometime soon. I'll try to transcribe some of the best quotes that I got from the digital artist who created this thing. But it's really, really fascinating stuff, and I'm glad I had the chance to and the time to do it while I was at Sundance.
That sounds insane. Like, this company expects to make money off this?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what their business model is exactly, but maybe I can reach out to the head of the company and try to get some quotes from them too, because I'm like going into this like completely flabbergasted that this technology and all of that this waterproof version exists, and I've never heard of this before. But it's a really cool, like, the zero gravity sensation of being underwater and floating there. Really added to the whole experience. So I thought it was really, really cool. Like,
on one hand, I really want to experience this. On another, I just feel like there's not going to be any place I can experience this at. I know they have like VR centers. So like, there's even like a thing downtown LA called 2-Bit Circus that has a lot of VR stuff. And they even have like some of the more complicated ones where you actually get on like this whole robotic setup that like is set up to like make it feel like you're flying. So you're
that's
like
kind of what this feels like. You're not moving, but it really, like, the way that the camera imagery moves or whatever inside the headset, it makes you feel like you're flying across the surface of these planets. It's wild.
Crazy. Chris, you didn't want to try the VR experience?
Well, I figured since Ben was doing it, I wouldn't do it. Also, I don't want to get in a bathing suit and
Okay, so most of your reviews, I think, are on the site right now. Are you guys still behind a few?
Yeah, I think I still have 2 more to do, and then hopefully, I can put something together for this VR thing. Chris, you're pretty close to done though, right?
I have 2 more as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So I will link the Sundance category in the show notes if you want to check out all the full reviews for not just the films that we mentioned here, because we only mentioned 8 films and you guys saw close to 30. So there's a lot more to discover. Check that out on slashfilm.com. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow. The one thing I'm wondering, Ben, is, like, you received an email from a publicist and you're like, yeah, I'm in. I'm going to, like, instead of going to a movie, I'm going to go get my bathing suit, head to the pool, and do...
Well, I didn't bring a bathing suit with me, but they had, I think they must have gone to Target or something and mass purchased a ton of bathing suits for all the journalists. And I think this might have been open to the public as well. So people could just come and like try on the bathing suit, or not try on the bathing suits, but just put on like a brand new bathing suit. And then I don't know what they did with them afterwards. Hopefully they washed them. And, I don't know. But the one that I tried on or used was untouched. So that's all I cared about in the moment.
But like, did you just get an email of like, come to the Sundance pool and we'll...
Well, yeah. Every year there's always, they always send out press releases about the VR stuff that they have. And I saw this one because of the underwater component. Now, I just never heard of that technology at all before. And I was just like, man, this is really interesting. I can't believe that this exists. And then it just so happened where I had a big opening one day and in my movie going calendar, and I was like, all right, I'm going for it. I got to see what this thing's all about.
Crazy. Okay.